Hello, everyone. This is Nayiri from Low Carb and Fasting. Now, my audience knows that when I invite a fellow type 1 diabetic, it's for my type 1 diabetics talk series. I'll put the playlist below so you can check it out. And we discuss type 1 diabetes. However, although today's guest is a fellow type 1 diabetes, we're going to discuss heart health. In fact, we're going to discuss chronic disease and with a focus on heart health. So our guest is a board-certified chiropractor and functional medicine practitioner. He holds a bachelor's degree in health and wellness and a doctorate in chiropractic medicine. He also has a master's degree in human nutrition and functional medicine. He's a public speaker. He's also the author of a number of books, the most recent of which is Understanding the Heart. Dr. Stephen Hussey, welcome to Low Carb and Fasting.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Hussey, I just finished, in fact, just a couple of days ago, I finished reading your book. And it was one of those books that I could not put down. Usually when you read a medical book, you go back and forth, you read a chapter and then it gets a bit too much. And then you get back and revisit that chapter and start taking notes. Your book has a beautiful flow to it, and it's suitable for the layperson as well as for anyone in the scientific or medical community. So I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book. I can't hold it up, people, to show you the book because my version, because I have the Kindle version. However, I will put the book link below, and I highly recommend that you go and buy the book to understand general health and particularly heart health. Stephen, let's start with how you started the book. You started the book with the biggest life-changing event that unfortunately happened to you when you were least expecting it, when you were not expecting it at all, I can say. Would you like to relay that to our audience, and we'll take it from there?
Yeah. So yeah, most of my adult life, I've been pretty passionate about health and trying to be the healthiest I can be. Being diagnosed at 9 years old with type 1, I'm predisposed to a lot of different conditions, particularly heart disease. And so I spent a lot of time, researching and trying to figure out how to prevent or how to create health, And yeah, to my surprise, I'd gotten higher and higher levels of health based on all my lifestyle changes. And to my surprise, I was 34 years old and I had a heart attack, a widowmaker heart attack. So a very serious heart attack, of which only 12% of people who have those types of heart attacks outside of a hospital survive. So I was one of those 12%. And so, yeah, it was quite shocking. And all this information that I had and that I was, trying to put into practice was, obviously good for me. But, it goes to show that these traditional paths to health and these traditional ways of tracking health are not the end all be all, because they are not a true assessment or they don't cover all the bases as far as what we should be doing to achieve health. And so, all the information I had beforehand was very important. I can't say that I was implementing all of them to the best of my ability. And I went through some very stressful times, that were somewhat out of my control just prior to the heart attack. And so, I've gone pretty deep in the research into figuring out why I think this happened to me, because when I was in the hospital, they gave me very bad answers, very inadequate answers, in my opinion. Because they were trained to, do a certain thing after someone had a heart attack. And so, I've as much as I knew before it happened, I've learned so much since, a lot since, and it all falls in line with what I wrote. So in a way, it kind of reinforced what I wrote. And, at first I had the heart attack and I was like sitting there in the hospital bed and I was like, I'm a hypocrite. I was very down on myself. It was a low point for me, but then what happened in the hospital As far as my care after the fact, I mean, my care of saving me from the heart attack was obviously, I'm very grateful for that. I'm thankful for modern science and modern medicine in an emergency situation. Very, very useful. But after the fact, as far as like what they told me to do was the complete wrong information based on the evidence, based on what actually creates health. And so it kind of re-inspired me just pretty quickly that the information that I had in the book is very, very relevant, and that people need to know it, because someone faced with that sort of situation and sitting there in the hospital, which will happen unfortunately to many more people, they need to be able to make educated decisions. And it's not to say that what I say to do in the book is right. It's just to say that you need all the information so that you can make educated decisions. Because how are you supposed to make a decision that's best for you if you don't have all the information? If all you have is the information you're getting from the caretakers in the hospital, how are you supposed to make the best decision for you going forward? And so I quickly regained my confidence and was like, people need to know this, especially with what I was experiencing in the hospital and their one-way approach to managing and preventing this again. And so yeah, I didn't take their advice or much of their advice at the hospital, and I went out home and I did my own thing, and I put together this regimen of healing my heart, and happy to say that my heart is 100% better. The conductive signal is completely healed. There's no signs of heart failure. The scarring of the heart is minimal to non-existent. So I'd say that I fared pretty well, not following their recommendations of all the medications and the type of diet they were recommending, which was terrible. So yeah, I mean, that experience happened to me, but it was pretty shocking and not ideal, but it has reinvigorated me in the end as far as spreading my message and helping people avoid that very situation, and helping people who are in that situation get out of it victorious.
Yeah, thank you for covering the current recommendations and the inadequacy of the current recommendations and the standard of care. You covered that, I think, right in the first chapter. I was surprised because they had an educated person in front of them asking questions. They weren't even open to answering the question. This is how it is. This is what you do. And they either didn't know any more than what they were recommending, or they didn't want to look further and investigate for you. It was just their way or your way. It's troublesome. It's troublesome reading that. Yeah, I was kind of troubled by that.
Yeah, so it was, all the things that I encountered in the hospital, whether it was the treatments, or all the medications pushed, or the type of diet, or what they wanted me to do going forward, all that was disappointing. But the most disappointing thing was the shutdown of conversation. As soon as I started questioning, or just, it wasn't even like doubting. I was just like thinking, well, why do you want me to do that? I was just trying to get information because, I valued their opinion. I wanted to know. I was going to make my own decision, but I want to know their opinion and why they want to do certain things. That's all information for me. But as soon as I started questioning it, they took it almost personal, and then they just shut down the conversation. So it just goes to show that in that setting, there's no one's really inspired to be curious, or they don't have time to be curious, or they just have no interest in being and figuring out what actually is going on. And if there's different ways, they don't have time to discuss that with me. They come in, they tell me what to do, and then they leave. And so there was just it was almost like I was threatening them just by asking questions, and I wasn't being argumentative. I was just like, well, what about this? Or what about the fact that this medication causes that, or whatever? And they were just like, well, this is what we do. They have a cookie cutter recipe of what they do for someone who has a heart attack, and this is what you do, and you don't ask questions. You go throughout your day. So that was the most disappointing thing, was a shutdown in conversation. So I hope that this book that I've written opens the conversation, because if we're really going to figure out what causes heart disease and what causes heart attacks, we need to open the conversation. That's the most important thing. We need to have open, honest discussion, and that's not happening, as I saw in the hospital, not happening at all. Because it's it's that open, honest conversation that gets us to the truth, because like, if you want to, you could say that I wasn't trying to be argumentative in the hospital, but sometimes it turned into little arguments, respectful arguments. And the point of an argument is not to win, it's to find the truth. And, the truth, at least, for both sides, where is the truth? And so when it becomes trying to win from one side or the other, then, the argument's never going to become productive. And so if you're obsessed with trying to win, which is they were telling me to do this, and if it wasn't their way, it was the highway. So, so it was trying to open the conversation and then not being open was the most disappointing to me.
When I was reading the book, I kept wondering what it would be like if it were me, with no understanding of heart health, obviously no prior knowledge, and with the system of care here in the UK. I'm in London. So I kept wondering if it would be different here, if they would be more open to discussions. And I've had no experience of that, fortunately. However, I have many other smaller experiences with my endocrinologist, with my GP, talking about low carb. And I know that they are not willing to look outside that narrow box. And so perhaps, if I were in your situation, it wouldn't be any different here in the UK either. So I did think about that. So let's start with the health part of the story now. So you do clearly say, and this is a quote from you, the breakdown in mitochondria results in chronic disease. And heart disease is, you classify it as chronic disease, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start off with the mitochondria. What are the mitochondria, and why are they so important? And what happens so that they break down and then they get damaged, and that results in chronic disease? Let's just cover all that. I know it's quite broad because you explain that throughout the book.
Yeah. So mitochondria are the little organelles inside of our cells that are responsible for a lot of different things. It's thought, we're taught in biology classes and medical school that they are the powerhouses of the cell, and that their main job is to make ATP. And ATP is, kind of like the energy currency, or we're taught that it's the energy currency in our bodies that drives all cellular processes and functions. Now, that is mostly true. I would say what I just said is mostly true, but mitochondria are much more than that. And ATP is not necessarily, the currency of the cell. It's very important, but it's not necessarily what drives all cellular processes. So anyways, the mitochondria are the organelles that allow us to take energy from various sources, whether it's the chemical bonds in food that we break down, and we can get energy from that, or the sunlight, or correct electromagnetic fields, like contact with the earth, like taking energy from our environment in the form of electrons, or in the form of electricity, we should say. And it takes that electricity and it passes electrons down what's called the electron transport chain, and we end up making a lot of different things. We make carbon dioxide, which is why we have to breathe that out, right? We make water, and this is perfectly deuterium depleted structured water that it's making, which is very important. That's the type of water you want to be made. So we're taught in school, though, this water is a byproduct. It's like, oh yeah, that's just a side effect of what the mitochondria do. It's like, no, it's actually very important. It makes a free radical. So, a free radical is a molecule with an unpaired electron, which is quote unquote unstable. But these free radicals do a lot of different things for us. They actually trigger a lot of different cellular processes, and they can even help with communication between different aspects of the body. And then also, the mitochondria generate heat, which is why we're warm, heat creating beings, the heat in the form of infrared light. So that's why we actually emit light as humans, but it's in infrared, it's non-visible spectrum light. And that's why you can put on a pair of infrared heat goggles or thermal goggles, and you can detect somebody. And then also they make ATP. And so the ATP is the main role for ATP is to unfold proteins. So proteins become folded, and if you unfold them, they get more surface area. And these unfolded proteins in the cell are what allow the cell pretty much to function like it's supposed to and communicate to other cells. And the main role of ATP is to maintain this unfolded structure of the collagen proteins, the extracellular matrix in the cell, so that it can do what it needs to and communicate. So that's mitochondria. Now, going into heart disease, that mitochondria are very, very dense in heart cells. There's lots and lots of mitochondria. Just one of the heart tissue is one of the tissues with the highest amounts of mitochondria in the entire body. It's about 5,000 per cell, give or take. The eye is also very high in mitochondria, and the brain's pretty high too. But the heart seems to be the highest. And so it's very, very important to maintain health of our mitochondria. And so to maintain health of our mitochondria, we need to, avoid inflammation and oxidative stress. So that can be lots of different things that we could talk about, but also getting adequate energy from your environment. So sunlight and grounding and things like that, but also, the correct, the correct fuel source as far as food goes is important. We get about a third of our energy from food, and so it's important to have a fuel source that is, I'd say, more efficient. And so that is fatty acids and ketones. Those are much more efficient fuel sources for our mitochondria. They create less exhaust, I would say, less, if you're talking about like a car metaphor, but they create less free radicals. They're more efficient. You get way more ATP when you use fatty acids and ketones. So, and it's interesting, the heart actually prefers to burn fatty acids and ketones. Whereas most tissues in the body, like we all know in the low carb space, that we have to restrict carbohydrates to encourage the body to go over to burning more fatty acids and ketones, to making ketones and burning fatty acids. But with the heart, even in the presence of glucose, it will choose to burn fatty acids and ketones. And I think there's a reason for that. And that is because if heart tissue is forced to burn more glucose than it wants to, issues can happen. And that can lead to what I call metabolic heart attacks. And so there was this trade-off, whereas, heart cells couldn't divide, so they had to be very, very efficient because they can't divide and make new tissue. They have to be able to repair themselves, so they have to maintain that efficiency. And that was the preference for heart tissue, to burn fatty acids and ketones. So yeah, mitochondria all play a role in that, and they're very, very important for our health. Literally, they're what's driving our physiology. So yeah.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that, because that was one of the quotes I actually picked out from the book, that most of our organs prefer to burn fat for fuel, but that's particularly true of our heart. So what damages the mitochondria? You did mention oxidative stress and inflammation.
Yeah. So
let's elaborate those, and what else damages the mitochondria?
Yeah. So we can't get a state where we have too much oxidative stress, too many free radicals around. And that can happen. There's evidence that shows that can be contributed to by having a processed food glucose burning metabolism, where you're burning too much glucose for fuel rather than fatty acids and ketones. It could also be a state where there's a lot of inflammation and oxidative stress from external things, from psychological stress or from toxin exposure, everything from plastics to heavy metals to, whatever, all these man-made chemicals that are out there can all act like inflammatory things that damage mitochondria and other tissues in the body. But a big thing with mitochondria and in creating their efficiency is maintaining what's called structured water in your body, because structured water it's a form of water that's not quite solid, not quite liquid. It's kind of a gel state. And most of the water in our body is in this state. So all the water in your cells, and even some of the water in the blood is this. But maintaining that gel-like state of water, that's why the ATP are so important, because they're unfolding proteins so that structured water can form on the lining of the proteins. That's why ATP is so critically important. Even though it's not like this energy currency driving cellular processes, but it does help maintain proper function in the cell because it unfolds the proteins, providing structured water to form on that. And so that's very important for the mitochondria because this fourth phase water is actually it's the right environment for the mitochondria to function in. Because if there's not fourth phase water there, then what can happen is if it becomes more liquid water, the fourth phase water is actually less, it's actually more dense, so it's more compact, right? And so then, if it becomes liquid water, it becomes more expansive, and so that stretches out what's called the electron transport chain. Mm-hmm. And if that stretches out too much, then the electrons can't get transported very well. They're supposed to jump down this electron transport chain, right? And so if it gets stretched out too much, it's kind of like the Super Mario video game. If I tried to jump and I didn't make it, they'd fall, right? And so that those electrons can't jump and make that transition. And so then all the end products of the mitochondria don't happen, right? So we don't get the water production. We don't get the CO2. We don't get the free radical. We don't get the ATP, right? We don't get the heat. And so it's that lost energy, that lost electrons that create excess energy that make us gain weight. Whereas if we make that more compact, we structure the water, then the electron transport chain works perfectly fine. So how do we structure water, right? The main way is infrared light. Mm-hmm. So you want to get infrared light on your body. So you want healthy mitochondria. It's all about light. So infrared light builds structured water the most, and blue light gets a bad rap because there's lots of artificial blue light in our environment today. But blue light is healthy for us if it comes in the context with all the other wavelengths and color temperatures of light. The problem is that on our screens and our phones and everything, it's just blue light. And so we're just getting blue light all the time, and we're getting it at the wrong times. And so that can really zap your mitochondria. That can really interfere with the water. Like I said, a proper metabolism and burning more efficient fuel sources like fatty acids and ketones will help make that structured water, help your mitochondria create that structured water, which helps in turn keep the mitochondria themselves healthy. The wrong types of electromagnetic fields can influence structured water. So Wi-Fi and cell phone, like radiation, stuff like that, we have to be conscious of that. And then also, different toxins like glyphosate, which is, the herbicide Roundup, has actually been shown to break down fourth phase water. So lots of different things, but what we want to do to structure the water, get cold exposure, get plenty of sunlight, put your feet directly on the earth, burn the right types of fatty acids. DHA, which is only found in animal foods, is very important for that. So those types of things, that's what keeps your mitochondria healthy.
Amazing. And Dr. Hussey actually has a wonderful Instagram account, and he demonstrates all of these things he's talking about, from infrared treatment to the grounding. You do quite a lot of that too in your reels. Okay, so stress. Let's talk about stress, because no one thinks of stress as something that's healthy for us. We all know it's bad for us. It's not healthy. We want to avoid stress. But the direct link between stress and heart health was actually something new to me. So, and you bring in stories from your younger days, from your childhood. I'm going to have a heart attack. I'm so stressed. And so let's talk about stress and heart health.
Yeah. So, I think that the saying goes, like, stress kills, and it's very, very true. It's just that in our modern world, nobody really tells you how to deal with it. Stress is going to happen. It's part of life. You can't eliminate it, right? It's just going to happen. It's our ability to handle it, have an appropriate response, and go back to normal that's important. And we can get into a situation where it becomes too overwhelming for our stress response, and that's exactly what happened to me. It's one of the things that contributed to why I had a heart attack, because I was in a very stressful situation. And so there's a few things that can happen. One, there's plenty of evidence, plenty of research that shows that an acute stress drastically increases the amount of inflammation and risk of clotting. And so that's what the issue is, that clotting is what causes atherosclerosis, clotting on the lining of the artery. It's not an accumulation of cholesterol. but clotting on the lining of the artery that the body tries to repair, but also acute clots that can form that are large enough that they can block an entire artery. That's what heart attacks are. Now, those atherosclerotic areas that narrow the artery can make that more likely to happen because their artery is narrowed. But it's the stress, or stress is one of the main factors that increases these clotting factors that encourage the body to form clots. Also, lack of or poor blood flow is also another issue there. So that's one issue with stress. The other issue is that it creates this imbalance in the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system is just the system in our body that's perceiving our environment through our senses, almost subconsciously, and telling your body, giving your body signals as if to whether you're in a safe or threatening environment. If you're in a safe environment, your body gets a signal to sleep or digest or whatever, do those types of things, detoxify. Whereas if you're in a threatening situation, your body has a stress response. And the stress response is designed to get you away from that threat or fight off and conquer that threat or whatever, eliminate the threat to your life. And so the problem with modern society is that we're the only species, humans are the only species that can literally think their way into a stress response. And our big brains have served us very, very well as far as where we've gotten to in the world. But we've developed this higher level thinking that we can think ourselves into things. And so that could be, you see something stressful happen to somebody else and there's no risk of it happening to you, or at least you have nothing in your environment that risk it happening to you, but you still fear that it happens to you. Or something stressful could happen to you. And instead of having that stress response and returning to homeostasis, you think about it the rest of the day or the rest of the week or the rest of the month, and we have all these perceived things from outside. I always think of like the dark web, all these ads for the dark web and how you're going to get caught, which may be a reality, but I think it creates this hyper fear. Or even COVID was a huge example of all this fear that was created, over this thing that was going to come get you, and fear of other people, and how they were a threat to you. It just created this fear. And so we think our way into these stress responses, and that creates this imbalance in our autonomic nervous system, and where it's not balanced signaling. Because we're supposed to be able to have a stress response, and it's supposed to be balanced out by a non-stress signal. It's always keeping itself in check. However, if we get into the states where we're chronically stressed about things, even if it's incorrectly stressed about things, like I said, we're overthinking, then we can get this state of like a surge of a stress response, and we don't get the lesser surge of a non-stress response balancing it out. And that can create a situation where we're always in this stress state and our body has no time to do anything else. So you think about it like people with insomnia or digestive issues, or sexual dysfunction, like their body's never in a rest and digest state where you can do those things, because it's always stuck in this hyperactive stress state. And so that can cause a lot of issues, especially for the heart, because the heart is the organ that perceives our emotional state and relays that state to the brain. It's why we say things like, I love you with all my heart, or we gave it all our heart, or, your heart's not in it. We have this very emotional connection to this organ because it is our sensory organ for our emotions. And there's actually more signals sent from the heart to the brain than the brain to the heart. And so because it's relaying that emotional state, and then the brain reacts accordingly, and there's actually, there's lots of nervous system signaling from the heart to the muscles of facial expression, because that's where we express our emotions. And so based on how our heart is feeling, our face is reflecting that. And so yeah, this balance in the autonomic nervous system, this state of emotion, it's not just driving the stress response, but it's also what creates coherence throughout the entire body. And coherence is just the state in which, if something is in coherence, it means that it's in a state where all the different aspects or parts of the living system, the living thing, are interconnected and communicating so that they're all doing what's best for the system as a whole. And so that's coherence. And the only organ that has a high enough electromagnetic field that can touch the entire body, every cell in the body, is the heart. The heart's electromagnetic field is 5,000 times stronger than the field of the brain's. So our emotional state is what's driving this coherence of the entire body. And so if our emotional state is not being communicated well, or we're stuck in this imbalance in the autonomic nervous system, then that coherence can be interfered with. And maybe different aspects of the body are not receiving that coherent signal. And we can start to get this incoherence. And that is heavily associated with more chronic disease. And the way we measure coherence is heart rate variability. And if you look at the research with heart rate variability is literally an indicator, or poor heart rate variability, low heart rate variability is an indicator of or contributor to pretty much every chronic disease out there, because it's measuring this incoherence. The body can't link up and sync up and communicate as a whole. And so we get different tissues starting to act on their own accord, right? Rather than what's best for the whole. And so that's how the heart kind of relates to all these different things, which is why like studying the heart has taught me more about physiology in the body and how it actually works, than learning anything else anywhere. It's just like actually studying this organ. I think that, there's a reason we say like it's at the heart of the matter, because I think that we understand that the heart is what's driving most of our physiology. And so we use that metaphor as like this, this issue, this is the heart of the matter. We don't say this is the brain of the matter, even though everybody says, oh, the brain's controlling everything. Well, we say it's the heart of the matter. Why do we say that? Because we know subconsciously that the heart is what's driving, or setting the tone for coherence and proper functioning of all physiology. And that's been shown in the literature that this is what's happening. So if this organ's off, it can affect the coherence of the entire body.
Yeah, it was fascinating to read that actually you compare humans to other mammals, and other mammals in a stressful situation, say if they're facing a predator or something, or, in any stressful situation, they're stressed. And then once that situation has happened and gone and over, they completely turn off their stress signals. We humans don't do that, right? It just continues with us for years and years and years, quite often.
It can even turn up as a stored past trauma that haunts us the rest of our life if we don't process the stress and deal with it appropriately and have the correct body response. It can be something that literally stays with us for way too long. Whereas animals don't seem to have the level of thinking. And I'm sure that it may happen to them too, but not at the same level as us, because we have this level of thinking. We tend to overthink it or think our way into stress responses even when there's nothing threatening happening, whereas an animal only has it when the stress is happening. So it's interesting. And then once the stress is over, they shut down the stress response and they're back to homeostasis again. And we don't necessarily do that.
Let's talk about food for fuel. We kind of alluded to it, obviously, that burning ketones is healthier for all our organs, particularly the heart. So what kind of a diet is best? You do cover actually Stephenson, for example, who is an anthropologist, and he lived with communities where they only eat meat and saturated fats. So you also cover, was it Weston Price research as well? So what's a good low inflammatory diet for humans?
Yeah.
The best for our heart.
Yeah. So, diet it's all full of these dogmatic camps, they're everywhere. Everybody says, oh, or not everybody, but lots of people say, oh, you should only eat plants, or you should only eat animals, you should paleo, even low carb. It's just, we can get into this dogma a little bit. And I think lower carb is better for most people, but it doesn't mean all carbs are evil. Doesn't mean that in season that humans didn't eat some carbohydrate when it was available, but it wasn't all year round, and it definitely wasn't the staple, the mainstay of their diet at all. And so, but we got to be careful not to get caught up in a certain way of eating and think that since it's best for me, then it's best for everybody, or that we need to be dogmatic about it, that we have to follow a strict set. Because I did that for years because it was, I guess, easy. If I had the strict set of rules, and I stuck to those rules, then it was easier for me to maintain a certain diet, whereas in reality, what we want a diet to do is, well, we want it to do three things. One is we want it to provide us adequate nutrients, so we want to be able to obtain the nutrients that we need, whether it's the fuel type nutrients, or it's the vitamins and minerals, then those are the important things. And then, so we need those things. We need it to create metabolic health. We need that diet to create an optimal metabolism, where the way that we break down our food is not harming us. But remember, food is only about a third of where we get our energy. So the other thing we want food to do is we want it to set us up so that we can gain energy from the rest of our environment. And so that is two of the main things that help us do that are the fatty acid DHA, which is only found in animal food, specifically seafood, or it's higher in seafood. But DHA is what literally allows us to take light from the sun and convert it to electricity so that our mitochondria can use it. And then also collagen, which is also only found in animal foods. That connective tissue protein is what our entire body is held together by. We have this fascia system within our body that's literally penetrating everything all the way down to the DNA, and all the way up to more gross structure like a bone or something, or skin. Like, it's literally holding us all together. But this fascial system is what allows us to also conduct information through it to communicate with the whole body. And so we need collagen, which is what we find in animal foods. So I think the animal foods are critical, and that maintaining low carb is, depending on the season, is also very critical, because it helps maintain our metabolism. But that's the way we should look at food. It shouldn't be this way of eating is the best, and I know it is, because it doesn't matter necessarily which way you're eating, as long as it's creating metabolic health, giving you adequate nutrients, and also setting you up to obtain nutrients from other places besides food. Those are the important things. And I think an animal-based lower carb diet is what does that the best. Doesn't mean that within our modern world, there's not other diets that could do that, other types of diets. But that one does it the best. Like a vegan diet, I think, is not going to give you the right nutrients. It's not going to give you DHA. It's not going to give you collagen. It's not going to give you a host of other things that you're going to miss out on. But the animal foods are most bioavailable. You're going to get the most nutrients from those. And then lower carb ensures that you're going to, have adequate metabolic health. Those are the important things about diet. So I hope as long as you get that, whatever you're eating, if it helps you do those things, then there you go. I guess the other aspect is you also want to make sure that your diet is not exposing you to toxins, right? So you don't want to be eating these processed foods that have been sprayed with all these chemicals, and different plant toxins can be an issue too. So you want to make sure that your food is also not creating a negative situation or doing a negative thing. You want it to only be doing those positive things, and make sure it does all those positive things.
I loved your story of when you were working in Dublin, Ireland, and you were a vegan at the time, or maybe vegetarian. Oh no, vegan. I think you were vegan, and then you were served this soup, and there was butter on the table, and you added butter to the soup, and felt better, and then you added more, and you felt better. I like that. So what do you think you were missing, your body was missing on a vegan diet? Because I also transitioned only 2 years ago from vegetarian, vegan diet to eating meat, as well as some vegetables, but I definitely thriving on a meat-based diet, although meat isn't the only thing I eat, but meat-based diet is like predominantly animal foods. I'm thriving on that diet.
Yeah, I mean, I always tried to be healthy. This was like, when I was in Ireland, that was almost 10 years ago now. And that's when I kind of switched over, because I had been vegan for a little while, and thinking I was doing what's best for my health. And And I think that the main thing I was missing was just the correct type of fats for my brain, and for I was depriving my body of the ability to take energy from the sun and convert it into energy for me. And so, but I think that was the main thing. And so I was kind of starving my brain a little bit, because when I started, well, first of all, yeah, I had that experience where someone offered me some butter, and I had some, and then I wanted more. And then I went to the store and I bought a chicken, and before I even realized it, I ate the whole thing. And I was just like, it's kind of like I had a moment where I was just like, well, I really want these things, and lots of vegans will shame you for it. Like, oh, you can't control your urges or something. It's just like, no, your body's saying it wants this, And so, and I think it was because I just for a long time hadn't had adequate amounts of the right types of fatty acids. And because what I noticed over the next few months as I started eating more and more animal foods was that my brain, I felt like it just was on fire in a good way, like not an inflammatory way, but like on fire, and like it was just functioning like crazy. Like I was, I was just reading things and just being able to remember them better and connect it up with other things I've read and just put things together. It was really the start of like my work, and like how I, started researching and reading and being able to put it all together into these books and things. It was like, that's what started it, was my ability to do that again. So I think the main thing I was missing was the fatty acids. But then blood sugar became a lot easier to control as well. And I stopped getting a cold every few months, and lots of different things happened that I would describe as good or positive things. But it's still though, like even just changing the diet, and that's my big thing, is that I would try and put forth in the book, is that heart disease is not just about diet. It's a small part of what can contribute to heart disease, but it's not the driver of heart disease whatsoever, in my opinion. And there's so many different other things, because this false theory about cholesterol and saturated fat that came about, and heart disease was blamed for those things, because that was a kind of a dietary thing. We found saturated fat and cholesterol within foods that we eat. Then the conversation about heart disease became all about food. And it had to be the way you prevent it had to be about food, and that can be a contributor to the systemic process that is heart disease, but it's only a small contributor, in my opinion. There's many other things that we should be doing, as far as our environment, that can contribute, or to heart disease or create health. So